Hey everybody, MS Farzan here, and in this video, we're going to discuss 3 ways for you to become a better dungeon master. Maybe this is your first time running a campaign, or maybe you've been running a campaign for several years. Either way, these 3 tips are going to help you become a better dungeon master and make sure that you and your friends have a great time with every session. The first thing I like to think about when approaching a new campaign is knowing my audience. When you know your audience, that means that you know the kind of system that might work well for your particular party. So if you and your friends are starting out with role-playing for the very first time, it might be good to start out with something like Dungeons & Dragons, which has a very good onboarding system to kind of teach you the ropes and show you how to play the game. If you've already been role-playing for some time and are familiar with the concept, you might want to try something like GURPS, which has a lot more crunch to it and maybe a little bit less accessible for new players, but a lot more depth if you're looking for that. The most important thing about this is to know your party and know what they're looking for in a game and in a campaign. You probably don't want to run a space-based campaign for a party that has just watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, for example, and are interested in playing something in a fantasy setting. Or if you know that your party is really heavy on combat and really enjoys to roll dice and kill monsters, having a long sweeping narrative where they engage with a bunch of different non-player characters and have to engage in this sort of big economy thing probably isn't going to be the best solution for them. So really know what they're interested in and what your strengths are. If you specifically want to run a Shadowrun campaign that operates mostly in the theater of the mind and you're not using miniatures and there's a lot of cloak and dagger intrigue and cybernetics and all of that cool stuff, that's awesome. Find a party who wants that as well. Your party, your group of friends, might actually want to play with miniatures in a 4th edition sort of setting and move stuff around the board. Know your audience, and that's going to help you develop a campaign that suits their needs and suits their interest as well as yours. Once you've decided on a campaign setting and a system, the next step is for you to overprepare. I know it may seem like doing a lot of homework, but the more that you do before your game session, the better you're going to feel prepared when your players ask you questions about stuff that you may not have thought of. So that doesn't mean that you have to be the expert in the group on the system. Of course, that would really help, but there's always going to be someone out there who knows more about the rules than you do. Goodness knows I get questions about fatigue and about the intoxication rules and a bunch of stuff that I don't have readily on hand, and I have to look it up like everybody else. But I like to know as much about the rules as I can, preparing beforehand so that when players have questions either about the rules or about the setting or come up with scenarios that I haven't thought of, at least I have some sort of background that I can build something on the fly if I need it. Here's an example. When you're building out the world and backstory for your players, whether it's for a homebrew campaign or you're running a pre-made campaign, it's really important to have a lot of details that the players may not even see. It lends an air of gravitas to the story that can't be done otherwise. If you look through all of J.R.R. Tolkien's works, there's not just The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. There's stuff like the Silmarillion, and there's a bunch of other notes that he has that have been compiled that are really interesting to read and to see. Some of it is just lineages of different elven houses, which is pretty awesome if you're into that sort of thing. But the fact that they exist allows the reader to really immerse themselves into Tolkien's world and feel that they're part of Middle-earth and know that it has this huge history and backstory that isn't just lines on a page. The same thing can be said for running a Dungeons & Dragons or role-playing campaign. If you have all of these different non-player characters and histories and continents and backstories that you've written for the campaign, the players can sense that, and more importantly, when players ask you questions about your world and about the story, you'll be able to answer them with confidence without having to think up of something on the fly. Now, it's impossible to anticipate every question that your players might have, but the more that you build out the world and the more that you familiarize yourself with your rule set, the better you'll be able to answer questions and really provide a setting for your players to enjoy and to live in. That being said, the third most important thing you can do as a dungeon master is to be flexible. I'm sure that if you've run even one campaign with other players, you've come across this kind of scenario. Let's say you're playing in this futuristic, post-apocalyptic sci-fi type of setting, and you've created this whole scenario where your players have to find their way around this river of toxic sludge. And it's this huge plot device and this whole moment where they're supposed to get there and say, oh goodness, now we have to find a way around this thing, and it's going to take them miles and miles and encounters and encounters to get around this thing. And one of your players says, oh, I have this hazmat suit and it's going to allow me to attempt to swim across this toxic sludge river. And you're thinking to yourself, great, I've planned this whole thing and now a player wants to throw a spanner into the works of my adventure and I don't know what to do. The easiest thing and probably the most natural thing to say is, no, you can't do that, and you're going to have to find your way around it some other way. But as a player, that's a really poor user experience. It would be much more interesting to be flexible and allow the player to attempt whatever it is they're trying to do with perhaps a high difficulty class role, or however it works in the system that you're using. And maybe there are consequences to the actions that they're taking. So like they try to swim in it and their hazmat suit sloughs off because it wasn't for that type of toxicity, and then they have to swim back and they're losing hit points, and the other players are having to throw them rope, or I don't know, there are radioactive penguins that are attacking this person. That's a much more interesting scenario than just saying, no, you can't do it. The more flexible you are, particularly when you've over-prepared for your campaign, so you have these different tools at your disposal, the more fun your players are going to have, and I bet you'll have fun doing it. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Twitter for more crunchy content.